Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen McKnight, Deputy Director for Early Learning Programs at the Hunt Institute. Before introducing our guest, I have a few words about logistics. Our panelists will present for 8 minutes, after which we will open up to questions for about 10 minutes. You may submit questions via the Hop and Chat function at any time during the presentation. I will synthesize and present selected questions to our panelists during the Q&A. And again, thank you all for joining us for this session on building the early childhood workforce. I'm joined today by 4 distinguished panelists. They will be discussing how to build a cadre of people trained in both child development and child policy, how to build policies and programs to support a high-quality, well-educated workforce to care for our youngest children, and how to address workforce wellness so we can retain and best support those caring for our youngest children. First, we have Dr. Lynn Kagan. Lynn teaches at Columbia's University Teachers College, where her work focuses largely on the application of child and parent development research to the formation and implementation of public policies, as well as the impact of institutions on the development of low-income children. Her curriculum and publications echo these interests as she teaches about the impact of politics on policy and education of all types, but specifically focusing on early childhood. Presenting with her is Dr. Kathy Thornburg. Kathy is the director of the Institute for Professional Development at the University of Missouri. She's a former president of the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and she's taught 3rd grade, been a professor at the University of Kentucky and Missouri, directed child development labs serving children ages 6 weeks to 10 years, directed the Center for Family Policy and Research at Missouri University, and served as assistant commissioner for the Missouri Department of Education. We're also joined by Ms. Marcia Baslow. She's president of Child Care Services Association. Previously, Marcia was senior advisor for the Office of Early Childhood Development for the Administration for Children and Families in the Department of Health and Human Services. Marcia also has worked on early childhood workforce initiatives in the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant and in collaboration with the U.S. Department of Education, and continues to be a strong advocate for the early childhood workforce. Additionally, we have with us Dr. Calvin Moore, Jr. He's CEO of the Council for Professional Recognition. Prior to becoming CEO, Dr. Moore has served on the Council's governing board and is the first CEO to hold the early education credential. The Child Development Associate. His previous work with Head Start led him to serve communities of all sizes, focusing on early childhood care and education, largely with Hispanic families. Calvin has also served as a regional program manager for the Office of Head Start and the Administration for Children and Families. And a personal note, he was my regional program manager when I was a Head Start collaboration director for North Carolina. So great to have you, Calvin. And finally, we have Dr. Katie Rosenbaum, a senior research scientist at the Center for Child and Family Policy. Dr. Rosenbaum is trained as a child clinical and quantitative psychologist. Her work focuses on program implementation and evaluation in the areas of early childhood systems, self-regulation development, child welfare, and trauma-sensitive schools. She has conducted longitudinal evaluations of child welfare reform, early childhood systems of care, and prevention intervention programs for mental health and education. Katie's also served on multiple state-level boards and task forces to strengthen the evidence-based implementation of programs for children and families. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to Lynn and Kathy to get started.
Everybody. Thanks, everyone. Hi, we're delighted to be joining you and have some exciting information about preparing a segment of the workforce that often is not actually addressed. Kathy and I are co-principal investigators of an effort that looks at developing individuals who are trained and capable of effectuating early childhood policy. And we are focusing our work on creating early childhood policy as a new field in institutions of higher ed. Next slide, please. What's the rationale and why are we doing this? Well, indeed, I think we all know that early childhood can be quite confusing to families and to policymakers, that indeed we need early childhood leaders who represent the diversity of the field and who are trained in public policy. And we need to forge some legitimacy for addressing policy as increased federal dollars are coming in to our services for young children. We build our work on the premise that early childhood policy is quite distinct from pedagogical policy, that we've had a lot of work on training people to work directly with children, but not so much emphasis on helping people understand better what it is needed to be successful in working with policymakers in leading state and federal agencies. Next slide, please. To do this, we have 4 goals. We are working to prepare individuals to assume policy leadership roles. We are looking to develop training programs within institutions of higher education that will train those individuals. We are working to determine the content of a brand new field, and we are working to establish this new field of early childhood policy. Next slide, please. To do this, we began by commissioning all kinds of data. What did people think an early childhood policy leader should know and be able to do? Who's doing it? And finally, what can we learn from other fields, African American studies, Black studies, environmental studies, and women's studies, about how you go about creating a brand new field? These data have been instrumental in shaping our focus. Next slide, please. We have developed, as you're developing a new field, you've got to determine, well, what is the content? And along with a wonderful advisory committee, we have developed 12 short modules on topics that are listed here. They will be comprehensive. I'm sure you will be familiar with many of them. Next slide, please. And we have developed these slides into course syllabi so that those who are interested in creating credentials, master's and doctoral degrees, indeed will not have to develop all new courses, but will have this content embodied within them. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to talk about how we're going about actually doing all this.
Thanks, Lynn. You'll see there are 5 structures as part of our initiative. I'm just going to start at the top with online network and describe each of them very briefly. So the online network is a web-based network for faculty and also professional development providers. It's housed at the University of Washington, and I'll talk more about it in just a minute. But right now I want to go to the green box of centers. As part of this project, we funded 5 institutions of higher ed to develop certificates and graduate programs in early childhood policy. It was a very competitive process, and we're thrilled that they're either up and running now or will be by fall. They each bring faculty together from different departments and colleges to form their degree program. So it's very interdisciplinary, which is exciting to us. The Alliance, on the right side, it's 8 universities have come together under the Great Plains IDEA, Interactive Distance Education Network, to provide a 12-credit online early childhood and family policy certificate. So the graduate students can either take it within a graduate degree program, or it can be taken by anyone as an online standalone graduate certificate. The next slide, please. So these are the 13 institutions that are working on the certificates and the degree programs. Collectively, they make up our 4th structure, which is the consortium. This is where the faculty from these institutions share materials, they brainstorm solutions to issues, and they help move our field forward. So you can see there are private and public institutions. And the next slide shows that they really are located all across our country. The red circles being the centers and the magenta almost circles being part of the Alliance, the 8 institutions where a student can enroll in any one of the 8 institutions and get faculty from any of the 8 institutions. So these 8 institutions are working together. And then our final structure is our outreach efforts. And we have basically 3 tiers of these efforts. A lot of personal outreach to interested individuals, and of course, oh, not this slide, please. Sorry. If you'll back up one. And presentations to a variety of groups. We're also developing ongoing relationships with various organizations and agencies so we can work together in what Lynn talked about in terms of developing this new field of early childhood policy. And then our third tier is really some new strategies. We hope to develop a MOOC, massive open online course, just an introduction to early childhood policy. So people from all over our country and world actually can start thinking of early childhood policy as an entity. We're also hoping to be able to provide scholarships for underrepresented students in these 13 institutions on the map, the ones we have funded, because we believe that those who are making policies at all levels need to represent the diversity of the children and families they serve. In addition, we're working with other institutions of higher ed and encouraging them to adapt the materials that have been developed, as well as join the network site. So the last slide shows, again, the network. It houses all of the materials that Lynn talked about, the syllabi, modules, and so forth. And it provides opportunities for faculty and professional development providers to share materials, to interact with one another. So there are lots of materials there besides the ones that have been developed by this initiative. There's job postings, conference postings, and also a section on DEI. So we encourage all interested persons to look at the site, ecpolicy.org, and also to join Policy Connect. The link is at the bottom of the page. That way you'll be with others interested in early childhood policy and can share information, ask questions, and so forth. So Lynn and I thank you, and we hope you'll join Policy Connect.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be able to follow Lynn and Kathy, and very excited that they are ensuring that our field is going to be steeped in policy. Our work at Child Care Services Association is really building the pipeline to get to that point. Child Care Services Association is an organization that works at the local, state, and national level. Next slide. And in our signature programs, we really have a vision that every child in an early childhood setting has a teacher who is well educated and well compensated, and that every early childhood teacher has access to affordable college education and workforce supports and earns a living wage. Next slide. Child Care Services Association has been working on workforce studies for about 30 years. We have worked on it for North Carolina. We've done it for a number of different states, and we support states as they think about doing their own workforce studies. In our most recent workforce study, which was pre-pandemic, you can see that there were critical issues keeping the workforce in the field. Teachers were looking for better pay, 81%, better benefits, more support for children with behavioral challenges, and more respect for my profession. Next slide. We know that compensation, a lack of compensation is a problem in our field. And we really believe that there have to be some core values. So the first thing that we do is to provide resources to increase the education and compensation and retention in the early childhood workforce. And those resources can be a mix, but they are really important to be able to have resources. I'm not going to go through the entire list of core values. You will get a copy of the slides, but it's extremely important that we create educational pathways and we think system, not program, as we grow to develop initiatives. And of course, we advocate for increased compensation. Next slide. So what I really do want to talk about is the Teach Scholarship components. There are 5 C's, and we famously call them the 5 C's. And I'm quickly going to talk about all 5 of them. The first is that we have comprehensive scholarship. And the comprehensive scholarship truly includes a variety of supports. And you'll remember that I said that we need to develop supports. So it could be tuition and fees and books. which have gotten very expensive, and travel, paid release time so that people can study. And during the COVID pandemic, we really came up with a variety of flexibilities. The second is college coursework. It's coursework. It could be tied. I know that Calvin is going to talk to you about the CDA. Coursework is also tied to the associate's degree, the bachelor's degree, and in some states we have the master's degree. It's typically 9 to 15 credits a year. The third is a commitment. And there's a contract that is signed that has a commitment between it depends on the scholarship type, the amount of time, where the commitment is. And we've been fortunate to have less than 10% turnover rate among our AA and BA scholarship recipients. The fourth really could not happen without our counselors. We could all go away, but our counselors are key to this work. Sometimes our counselors have worked with our recipients for a number of years, and they get invited to their graduations. And the fifth must include compensation. At the end of every year of a scholarship, there needs to be a piece of compensation, an increase. It can be a bonus or it can be a salary increase. All of these pieces are crucial and why we're working to really teach in a North Carolina apprenticeship program as well as a national apprenticeship project. Stay tuned. This is coming. Next slide. So I also want to talk about childcare wages. The childcare wages program is a salary supplement program that is really based on education. It's an education-based salary supplement, and it's supported teachers, directors, family child care providers since 1998. It's important because it gets money directly into the hands of the workforce. It improves the quality of care by retaining educated teachers and enhancing their well-being. And honestly, it promotes the healthy development and early learning of our teachers. We hear wonderful stories about the fact that this really makes a difference in their survival by having the salary scale. Next slide. So I was asked actually to talk about what is really needed to build the workforce. And so I'm going to briefly mention, I talked about compensation and supports for the early childhood workforce and benefits for the early childhood workforce. But I want to mention that it's really the adequate compensation is a basic tenet to a stable, well-qualified, respected workforce across all fields. And it's not just about a specific number, so much as it's a broader need to balance the cost of living with the acknowledgement of how difficult the work is and the skill set needed and the proportionate to the workload. It's, so those are the biggest barriers that we have. We certainly need more respect for the profession, and we have the power to the profession. NACCE came out with the unified framework. I think that we're all working to really raise the respect for the profession. During the pandemic, we discovered that the workforce was essential, and now it is time for us to really be recognized as an essential workforce. The third is innovations to engage those who want to go into the field. I mentioned the apprenticeship, and I think that that is one of the innovations that we're looking at. We're looking at credit for prior learning. There's a number of different strategies that are happening. Child Care Services works with 23 states in DC across the country on scholarships, and there are many, many innovations that are happening. It's what makes me think positively about the work ahead, and more support for children with behavioral needs and behavioral challenges and their teachers. And you're going to hear from Katie Rosenbaum that's going to talk about some of the supports that are already there. I want to close by saying that what we tell other states is that if we look at the workforce, if you build it, base it on research, assess what you can do, then tailor it to your needs, make it achievable, make it understandable, and make it multi-level, and make it something that you can administer. Have a baseline of support and communicate. Communicate with staff, communicate with providers, communicate with the childcare community, funders, business, and labor. Building the early childhood workforce truly belongs to all of us. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Marcia, and all my colleagues. I'm thrilled to be with you today. I'm here from the Council for Professional Recognition. The Council's mission is the improved performance and recognition of early childhood professionals working with young children. We're focused on the teacher preparation of early childhood educators and ensuring they are recognized as qualified and competent to perform in early care and education settings. As a national credentialing organization, we are uniquely positioned to collect data, analyze workforce issues, identify trends, and even forecast demand for professional development certification. Some of the things that we've learned and would like to share today about the credential itself is that we've issued over 800,000 in the 46-year history of the credential. 40,000 credentials are issued each year. In fact, we issued 40,000 plus in 2021. And we also survey our credential recipients every 3 years. The latest data came from 8,500 survey recipients with a response rate of 22%. At the Council, we believe the CDA is the best first step. The credential is portable, it's transferable, and it's the most widely used early care and education credential in the United States. However, we have credentialed individuals in Panama, UAE, Egypt, and China. According to our survey results, 62% of our CDA holders are white, 23% are Latino, 25% are Black, and the remaining 13% we categorize as other. CDAs earn, according to our survey results, $35,000 or less in the workplace, and most, believe it or not, report receiving some sort of benefits in the workplace. The impact of the CDA, 23% had gone on to earn an AA degree, 17% had earned a BA degree, and altogether 68% of our survey respondents had completed some college courses after receiving their CDA. We have some exciting workplace impacts of the CDA as well. 16% of lead teachers received a promotion after receiving their CDA, most of them to a directorship. 30% of assistant teachers were promoted to a lead teacher position, and a small percentage of those were promoted to director as well. Probably most impactful for us at the Council is the perception of the CDA among our CDA holders. I'll tell you the top 5. Survey respondents report that it allowed them to learn best practices in early childhood education. It made them feel connected deeply to the profession. It helped them stay up to date in the early childhood field. And finally, early care and education educators report that it started them along a career path. The issues that are currently facing us in the field is a massive teacher shortage, and in many ways, our field is in crises. An interesting article last year published by the Washington Post captured, I think, our unique problem. We all acknowledge that the teacher shortage is massive in our field, but we don't always get it right in terms of the fact that the market can't fix this situation. Only public will and public support can fix it. The good news is that our field is getting unheard of attention at the national level, but there may not yet be a collective will to make significant systemic level investments to change the way our early care and education system is financed. We must push harder for this kind of makeover in our field, and it is why we implemented our very first Capitol Hill Day just last week at the Council. CDAs all over the country, over 300, registered for our Capitol Hill Day, and they advocated for the CDA and systematic change in our sector. We facilitated over 52 congressional office visits, and we're thankful having the capacity to do that. However, there continues to be strong demand and need for the CDA that we are witnessing firsthand. The CDA is uniquely positioned during this crisis because it's the more widely accessible credential due to its cost and the time it takes for a candidate to be ready for assessment. As I reported earlier, we credentialed 40,000 individuals last year, and in 2020, it was 43,000 in the midst of a dynamic pandemic. More than 60% of the cost of our CDA is paid by employees, not by scholarships that may be provided by CCDF funding. Teachers need support in case they want to earn additional credentials, not just the CDA. We recognize that the CDA is the foundation, but teachers need support to go on to achieve their associate's degrees and, yes, their bachelor's degrees. The council is committed to advocating for more state and federal attention so that these scholarships can be funded. We are also committed to advocating for degree track credit for all CDAs and CDA training across the country, and for career pathways that allow the individual to choose what path works best for them. We have 3 policy buckets that we're focused on as a credentialing organization. Many of those things have been talked about today. Career pathways should include alternative ways for candidates and other educators to get in degree programs. And we believe all credentials should be degree track credentials so that they're stackable. We must advocate for things that educators cannot advocate for themselves. And one thing that we have really been paying attention to is articulation in the higher ed community. Credentials like the CDA, which is our second bucket, should be embedded within state and federal regulations across the country. Also, we encourage CDAs, just as we did last week, to get in the advocacy mode all across this country. With the attention being paid on our field, we must stand in line and we must be retooled to speak with our own voice and tell our own stories and ask decision makers for what we want. I'm a CDA holder, and I was proud to meet with my senators and representatives last week, and I did just that. I told them that our field needs compensation. We need alternative pathways for folks entering our field. We need sustainable resources so that our teachers and directors can get the support that they need to teach our youngest children. And finally, I told my story, that I was an Air Force airman coming out of the field of the military for 4 years, entering early care and education, not really understanding my connection to this new and exciting career path. But after earning my CDA, I went on to earn a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD. Now, I don't believe that's the path for every educator, but I believe they can choose for themselves, and they must be able to do so. And that will be the seat of my advocacy as I take my place in this great field that we love so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's great to have this wonderful group together, and I've really appreciated the comments of all of my colleagues. I want to underscore a couple of the things that they've said. We have never had more awareness of what an essential workforce our early childhood educators are than we have for the past 2 years. And at the same time, we have never had a harder time getting and retaining these wonderful workforce staff members that we need. So I want to give you my own spin on some of the things that we can do to support our early childhood workforce and encourage more to join this important work. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the IttyCare project in North Carolina. The first thing I want you to do is think, especially for those of you who are parents, about what it takes to take care of a young child all day long. What does that look like? What are all the roles that you play? All the times that you have to comfort a child and kiss their boo-boos away. Give attention to those watch this moments like every 5 seconds that they want to show you what they're doing. Support interactions and help them resolve conflicts with siblings or playmates. Teach them rules and routines. Just play with them. Help them feel valued and loved and cared for. That is a busy day. And I want you to imagine doing that with 18 preschoolers in one room at the same time, who all come into this room with different experiences, with different needs, with different skill sets, with different cultures, and they each need all of those roles from you. You're doing that work while at the same time maintaining safety standards, COVID protocols. You're teaching early academic skills. You're teaching social emotional skills with 18 individual children without a bathroom break, while you're juggling your own personal stresses and maybe about to run off to a second job because you're trying to make ends meet. Our early childhood workforce is quite literally building the brains of our next generation, and we need to think about what we're giving them in return. Next slide, please. As my colleagues have mentioned, these staff members are not making a large amount of money. They, on average, across the nation, have an income of about $10.72 an hour back in 2018. And that's less than you might make at your average big box store. Think about how that would feel when you're putting so many skills and so much effort into supporting these young children and giving them that love and developmental support that they need. We know that 53% of childcare staff receive public assistance as a result of their incomes. 20 to 25% of early childhood educators report clinically significant symptoms of depression. So it's not surprising that we're having such a hard time both getting and retaining these wonderful, strong staff members in this workforce. Next slide, please. This may be a model that is familiar to many of you. This is the pyramid model for promoting social and emotional competence for infants and young children. And when we see this in the classroom, what we talk with teachers the most about is how to focus on the bottom of that pyramid with high quality supportive environments and with nurturing and responsive relationships. So you'll have coaches that go into a classroom, or if you've got an apprenticeship model, you'll have peers that are working with teachers on how do you build the bottom of the pyramid to have a good classroom climate. But I would like to point out that there is a layer to this pyramid underneath nurturing and responsive relationships, and that is effective workforce. That is the foundation upon which we build all of our early childhood development. And if we're not paying attention to the workforce, we're not going to be able to achieve any of the levels above on that pyramid. Next slide. We know that teacher stress is related to less positive attention to children, more punitive reactions in the classroom, and as a result, more behavior problems in the students in the class. When you walk into a classroom of young children and you've had a bad morning and you're feeling a lot of stress, what do you think those kids notice? What do they feel? That stress is contagious, and it sinks right into their little bodies and little brains and comes right back out in the behaviors that you see in that classroom. So if we can support the adults, then we're going to go an awfully long way to supporting those children. Think about if we changed our quality rating and improvement system to really focus on what the adults are getting in the child care and early education environment. How much would that take us towards automatically having a strong quality rating in the classroom environment? So here on the page right now, on the screen right now, you will see a graphic of our IttyCare model. And the biggest thing I want you to focus on here is the core of this model in the very middle of the circles is start with you. We must start with the adults by providing them not only with the wages and the benefits and the education and ongoing mentoring and support that they need, but by thinking about the workplace standards that we can put into a classroom to support that wellness. Do they have a clear time for a break? Can they step out when they've just had about enough and need 5 minutes to take a deep breath and get themselves back together? Can they take that bathroom break? Is there someone who can come in and give them help with a child who's struggling and may need some extra one-on-one attention while they're working with the rest of the class? Are there opportunities during the day for them to both learn about and practice self-care and wellness strategies for themselves? So we really advocate for focusing on the adults and doing this at a multi-level way, so that we're not just working with teachers, but with directors, with coaches that come into the classroom, like infant toddler specialists, with the organizations that hire those coaches, so that everyone has the same priorities and the same understanding of our goals and our mission. And if we do that well and focus on those adults well, we'll be able to move through these outer rings of the circle to create an environment that is productive and supportive for early childhood development in a trauma-informed and culturally responsive manner. I want to focus or point out that on the side here of this particular slide are links to some tip sheets that you might want to check out that use this model and talk about how to use this model with an infant, toddler, or preschool classroom. And that is through work that I did with several colleagues with the Administration for Children and Families. Next slide, please. Finally, I do want to point out that we don't need to recreate the wheel. There are a number of strong and evidence-based models that are out there already. And so with the IttyCare model, we really capitalize on what's already out there and weave that into the training, the coaching, and the systems level reform that we are trying to put into place to create a more universal emphasis on workforce wellness. So this shows you a list of some of those practices that we rely on, as well as our core book, Trauma-Informed Practices for Early Childhood Educators. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you all. That was great conversation starters. I really appreciate all that I've learned from you today and being in the field. And there are some interesting questions in the chat. You know, I'm seeing one around the early childhood ECE field versus the ECD field. And I was kind of thinking about that as, you know, we're talking a lot about the workforce crisis, teacher shortages, but we can probably assume that there are a lot of shortages across the early childhood field, whether it be home visiting or others that support families or provide support in childcare, just because of the toll it takes on people getting back to work in the economy. What is your response to that? Like, what are you thinking about for the development of the early childhood ECD for workforce, for example, and with a specific focus on people of color and individuals in the workforce and as leaders in the field? I don't know if that's a big question. Who would like to start?
So I'm happy to start, Karen, if you want, and say that in North Carolina, we have always focused on a diverse workforce. And that's really quite obvious in our percentages of minority teachers in the classroom who are educated, who have degrees. And I think that we also, you know, you started out by asking about the broader early childhood workforce, and, you know, teach and wages, you know, teach supports home visitors, Smart Start agencies, you know, a broader workforce, because we have a broader workforce. And I'm hoping that the broader workforce will also want to learn about policy, quite honestly, so that we can actually continue to grow the policy field and have it be diverse.
I also think that we have to start early. I think we have to build a pipeline from high school all the way through our higher ed experiences, and we've bet all of our chips on the high school CDA at the council, because we do believe that we won't just get people of color interested. We'll get more young men interested in our field, and so. Diversity is not just about race and ethnicity. It has to be about gender as well. And so I think the earlier we start with our recruitment efforts, the more likely we are to have some sustainability in our practices.
I would just add that all of this workforce, home visiting, all of the early childhood development workforce is also under a considerable amount of stress. And things that are going to work for early childhood educators are going to work across the field. We need to do more reflective supervision. We need to have more coaching, not just training, not just a one-off where I come and learn something, but do I have somebody who comes in and sits and processes it with me and walks me through how to implement it in the day-to-day work that I do? And then do I have someone who's asking me on a regular basis, how are you doing? How can I support you? What do you need right now? Because you as an individual are important and valuable, and we need to be taking care of you too. So all of those are pieces that we need to be doing for all of the early childhood field, and really, really all of us.
So how do we get our state higher education institutions involved with having programs or joining the Alliance for Institutes for Higher Ed?
I'll tackle that one. As you remember, there were 8 institutions currently working on it. And so a faculty member, at least one faculty member from each of those 8 might be teaching one of the 4 courses required for the certificate. At this point, we're staying with the 8 institutions until we get so much enrollment that we actually will need more faculty to help teach. And so my dream would be in maybe 2 or 3 years, we might be able to add more institutions of higher ed and become part of the Alliance if they have a faculty member who would like to be part of the teaching staff for that certificate.
If I might just add a PS to that, but that doesn't preclude, if you know scholars who are interested in early childhood policy, the materials are available for them, and anybody at any institution of higher ed could teach any one of the courses that we have already laid out and that have been agreed upon by the field. I'd like to go back for just a minute on this distinction between ECE and ECD, early childhood development versus early childhood education. I think it's a fundamental issue that we in the United States rather uniquely grapple with. I spent about 50% of my life studying policies of other countries. There are a few other countries who actually distinguish between ECD and ECE. They develop comprehensive policies called ECD that span the whole array of health, mental health, and social services. So I do think it goes back to our unique policy structure in this country in terms of why do we end up with a pre-K movement, for example, that focuses on ECE only. We're fairly unique as a country in that, and studying policy gives insights as to why that emerged and indeed what we can do about it. But I'm appreciative of those who call that distinction and really highlighted it. It is very important and it is very unique to this country.
So we have another question, I think an important one around compensation. How do we continue to demand more from our workforce in terms of credentials, classroom requirements, education, but we don't compensate them? We don't provide health benefits. They don't receive retirement. How do we find the funding that they deserve?
Well, I don't think we can do it without public funding.
Exactly.
Just put it, it has to have public funding. I think that the private philanthropy can support some of the gaps, but public funding really takes care of our K-12 and some of our public pre-K, and public funding is going to have to take care of the early childhood workforce as well, because our children from birth to 5 and even before birth, they are too important for us not to invest in.
I totally agree. There's no way the market can fix what's wrong with our ECE funding. It has to be part of our engagement, part of the policy work to advocate for a new financing structure for our field.
Exactly.
That is not part of, building a way for parents to pay tuition. I mean, they're paying as much tuition as they can pay right now. It has to come from state and federal support, and we need public will to do it. We were very close. I felt like we were so close this time. We were so close. It was amazing.
It's not over.
Okay. All right, Marcia. I'm gonna remember you said that.
I like that positivity. I want to come back to this about, how do we encourage our audience to get more involved with policymakers? But I know I've seen a question around power to the profession a couple of times and want to make sure we address that. Where does power to the profession fit into this discussion?
Well, I think it has a place. I, for one, as CEO of the council, our organization sits on the Commission of Professional Excellence in Early Childhood Education, which is the body that is supposed to implement the unifying framework that was created with power to the profession. So it's very much a part of the work that we're thinking about at the council, and we believe that we fit within the structure that they laid out in the unifying framework, that the CDA does. And so I think that it is important to continue to engage in those conversations and make your voices heard about the unifying framework that came out of the power to the profession. And I think that we have been fighting for some unifying language and frameworks for our field for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And power to the profession, and I'm not going to articulate this well enough, is a unifying framework created by a lot of people, but published through the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Thank you, Ms. Ford, for putting the link in the chat. And it is something states are considering, but it does take a lot to figure out how to implement it. And I think that's what states are going through right now. And so we just have a minute or two left. So going back, we've talked a little bit about this public will. How do we encourage our audience to build that public will? What is the messaging that they need to consider when talking with their legislators or their local policymakers? What is it that they should be thinking about as they are trying to improve the field?
Well, we're coming right off of a Capitol Hill Day at the council, and what we tried to get our CDAs across the country that were interested in speaking to their congressional offices is that they really need to go into those conversations, number one, knowing what they want to ask for. Every congressional staffer said, "What do you want from us?" And you have to be ready to articulate that. And then the second thing is to tell your personal story, to really, grab their attention with those personal anecdotes about your experiences and the experiences of those that you may be advocating for. Mm-hmm. I think know what you want to ask for and be clear about that, and then tell your story. It makes a difference.
And I might add just a quick PS. It's telling your story is all important, as are data that support that story. Because it's likely we've got a very rich research base in the field, and it's very likely that we can marshal that and should. People are moved by stories and they're moved by data.
Okay. So I think we may have time if we can answer this quickly from Brian Gold. How best can we involve community colleges in training and promoting our new early childhood workforce? I talk to a lot of community college folks, and they don't often promote this because they don't want to essentially put students into poverty.
Yeah.
So how do we help our community colleges move this work forward?
They're our voice as well. They're the ones who can help advocate. We can change this trajectory so that someone going into early childhood is not going to be in poverty. And it's going to take every single one of us to do that. And I think it's also important to remember that when you start in early childhood in the classroom, it could be a stepping stone to a host of careers. I'm looking at the screen right here, and I can see all the different possible opportunities for people who start in the early childhood field and who can be anything they want to be. And so it's up to us. It's up to every single one of us, including the higher ed community.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I want to extend my warm thanks on behalf of Duke University, Sanford School of Public Policy, and the Center for Child and Family Policy, as well as the Hunt Institute, to Lynn, Kathy, Marcia, Calvin, and Katie. This was a terrific session. I'm inspired as usual whenever I talk with you all. And thank you to all of you who have attended our online event. Following this, we have a short networking break. If you'd like to participate, you can click the networking icon on the left of your screen, and you'll be connected to another conference participant for a 3-minute conversation. Starting at 3:10, I believe. The next session is putting the pieces together, lessons from the legislative and ballot wins for the universal approach. So thank you all again and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks.